Kia ora koutou, huhu mai nei tēnei ahi, me tima te tātou i te karakia, o reira ngā mihi o te rā, ki te whānau e hui nei, kia tauturangi Māori e, kia whakatapu a tātou me ngā mea whakapono ana tātou, haumi e, hui e, tāki e. O reira, hui ana kia tātou i tēnei ahi, huringa whakaaro ki ngā tini aitua hinga mai nei hi ngā thir e rungi ngā marae maha, ko te tau aku kuia tērā, Josie Mortensen, i mati ngā wiki ko pahureake, koe hoki te wāhine tuatahi, haere ki te Elam School of Fine Arts, te wāhine Māori, koe no te kuia haere ati rā. Rātu ki rātou, tātou no ki a tātou, tēnā tātou, ngā mātana, ngā pukenga, ngā ihi, ngā tapu o tēnā rohe o tēnā rohe, putono i Aotearoa, tērā pia, etahi putono i te ao, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, thanks for coming along to our latest installment of the Whāki webinar series. This one is really focusing on some work that's emerging from a new project funded through the Science for Technological Innovation, which is the Veracity Lab and the Veracity Project, and an idea which was put together around really having a treaty-based approach to public digital infrastructure. And so you may have had the chance to get on board and have a look at the paper. We're really treating this as a sort of an open discussion, open development process. The paper was submitted as part of the consultation process for the digital strategy for Aotearoa, but really it's been kind of treated as an open exercise. So we'll continue in that light. Do want to acknowledge members of the Veracity project that are here as well, including co-director of the lab, Lucas Roche, Kia ora Marcus, and others like Brendan and Kelly and Tim, and I see a few others that are sitting there as well. And also that there's myself and Kevin and Pia, who are generally, well, we're going to do a bit of the talking in the front part, but really try and leave a lot of space for a bit of a general conversation about, where this all heads. It seemed like a good idea when there was about a dozen of us at the beginning. So I'm going to kind of kick into these slides pretty quickly. We've got three components here. And so I'm going to talk a little bit just about the Veracity Lab generally in the first instance and very quickly. And then Pia will talk about the paper and how the idea for it came up and the different ways of thinking about it from a Te Tiriti point of view. And then Kevin's got a few thoughts about what that might start to look like in practice. So this is the Veracity Lab, and it's emerged out of a project funded, which is a Veracity project, but funded by the National Science for Technological Innovation. And I didn't really know what Veracity was. I hadn't heard it the first time it got talked about, but this whole idea of trustworthiness, truthfulness, and authenticity. And I think that's really important in the context of a real digital environment and digital ecosystem where data is moving around places all the time. And so we see things coming up like deep fakes, information being provided that's disinformation or misinformation. And so how can we trust those things? So, I think there's three really nice statements here, and I've got to give Marcus the credit because these are all his slides, which he's put together for other talks. But, can tell you the truth, but I can do so for deceptive or dishonest reasons. So that's going to create a low veracity environment. You can think it's me who's telling you some truth, but it's someone who took my digital identity. What I call that catfishing. It's another sort of example of low veracity. Or it could be me who is telling you something, but I'm lying. And I think we're seeing that a lot with a lot of the kind of misinformation, disinformation going on as well. So all of these create a low veracity and digital environment. And so why is it that we thought, or that within the context of this larger larger national science challenge, they thought that Veracity was a grand challenge. So that if our future is going to be built on these digital assets and digital resources that start to be shifted around the world in different ways, there's going to be places where we know that veracity can be compromised, or it might sort of be done in a way that either the receiver getting the things isn't getting the thing that they thought they were getting. And so that can happen at small scales, or it can happen at really large scales. And what you want to be doing is sort of tracing those components so that you know you're getting something authentic or something that is legitimate. So part of our conversations as we were setting up the project were really guided by this idea which Kevin had discussed with the team around Te Tai Ao Matihiko, and emphasizing that there's how do we create a holistic view of the world that includes both the physical and the digital spheres. And the project itself recognizes that the challenge is both a technical one but also a social one, and so both of those things need to be considered, and can think about that in relation to these ideas that he's developed around mana motuhake, manaki, and mana whakatinana. So here is the project team for the Veracity project. I see myself and Marcus, Brendan's on the line as well, and a number of the researchers, Kelly and Tim and Kevin, that are participating in different components of that project. Through it, we're looking at Veracity in relation to 3 particular use cases. One involves indigenous data, and that involves a project I'm involved with around labeling digital records for cultural heritage items, or digital records for gene sequences using traditional knowledge labels. And so as a community customizes a label and puts it on that record, and that record gets accessed by people around the world or gets shared into other environments, how do we know that their protocols which they put on that material are still there? And so trying to ensure that there's high veracity, integrity around those labels when they're visualized in all the places they might emerge. There's another one around natural products and thinking about organic products. And so if an organic product is, something goes out from a producer and it ends up in a marketplace, that product is actually the organic product that arrives there. And we've heard all the stories about there's much more manuka honey sold in the world than there is produced because of its value. People say that it's manuka even when it isn't. So that sort of element. And then another use case which is yet to be developed, but really thinking about what does that look like in the context of artificial intelligence as well. So I think the 3 kind of final points just wanted to make here around veracity, and this relates kind of directly into what then Pia is talking about. Veracity is a full stack challenge. I don't fully understand what all the stacks are, but it's like a whole layer of different things that need to come together. And veracity is most challenging and interesting to look at in open data infrastructures. And so as we push more and more data sets into open environments where anyone can access them, how to maintain the integrity or authenticity of that information is, becomes a more challenging exercise. And this final one, that to get a high veracity, you need both technical and regulatory and governance solutions. So kia ora koutou, that's my little intro to this, and I'm going to pass over to Pia to talk about the digital rights paper and how that's come about. But I'm just going to say, feel free to chuck questions in the chat as we're going along. We'll try and get through these sort of slides quickly and get into just a general discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about just 2 quick things, but just a quick intro to what this is. when you're starting to look at Veracity, you immediately find that everyone's view of, if you like, the stack, as it were, is different. And it also creates so creating a common framework that everyone could use gives both a point of commonality that all the different players can use as a bit of a skeleton, but it also gives a chance to frame, if you like, that model around some values. So you don't just end up with tech for the sake of tech, but you end up with values driven and designed infrastructure. So so I'll just throw up some slides as well, apologies, but I'm going to just start with a little cartoon I made about Veracity, just to build a little bit further on what Maui presented. But you know, it's something that affects people every day, even though we don't think about it. You know, is something true? Is something fake or real? What's genuine? How do you know you're being gamed online? How do you know the decisions being made by software or robots are correct, let alone whether the data that they're based on, has that been gamed? And the very human implications of when computer says no, how do we know why? How do we appeal? How do we have trust in the decisions being made, not just by humans, but by machines, and increasingly by machines, so that we can trust in and also have continued access to social justice by being able to question those things, particularly with Section 23 of the OIA Act in this country, which is a fabulous piece of legislation that says that, you know, every government decision should be explainable. So that's a very high requirement, and yet how many government systems are actually explainable by design right now? So why create a framework? We want a consistent framework. A consistent model to work around. We want to explore how digital public infrastructure, you know, you think about public infrastructure like roads or schools or health systems, what's the digital equivalent to that? And how would that sit alongside and intersect with self-sovereign systems? And particularly when you start thinking about the public sector as serving the partnership, the treaty partnership, as opposed to being on one side of that partnership, it starts to get quite profound. How can we expand the policy narrative? Because unfortunately, too many people hear the word digital and just assume it's broadband or apps. How do we actually start helping people understand, particularly policymakers, investors, lawmakers, etc., that if we don't have Veracity end to end in that stack, then you lose Veracity entirely. If part of your supply chain, as it were, of decision making or data can be gamed, then how can you trust the outcomes from that? And to help people understand the importance of investment and such. So very briefly, people can't change to what they can't imagine. So we wanted to reimagine what Digital Aotearoa could look like. So we thought, why wouldn't we start with Te Tiriti? If digital infrastructure is the land that we all stand on in a digital world, and if government are going to have a role to play it, which if you start thinking about digital public infrastructure, then it probably should, why wouldn't we start with treaty? And we did this as a bit of an experiment, and it was the result of a few sessions, a few kōrero that led to what you're about to see. And it's very early days, and it needs lots and lots and lots of discussions over years to come. So all the caveats out the way, let's show you what we got to. So obviously, everyone here would know the treaty, but the colours are kind of helpful. So Article 1, 2, and 3, and we didn't use Article 4, understandably, I think. And then the governance being a shared governance. So the colours here almost then go, when you start thinking about it in a digital context, that got quite profound. So if Article 1 is kawanatanga, governance over the land, over their land, what's controlled together, what is the digital whenua? What is the placenta, what is needed to sustain and support life in a digital world, became a very interesting question and something to explore. What could be common? What are the things that could be common standards, infrastructure platforms that people need, that serve many or are needed at scale to democratize everything, value creation, reduce the barriers to self-sovereign systems, etc. A lot of people think about technologies, but and obviously network and cable goes into that, but how far up the stack would make sense. It was an interesting realization that things like domain name management are entirely privately managed, and then electricity and all kinds of things. We went through each one of the I'll probably spend most time on this and then I'll move on and get through the rest fairly quickly. But Article 2 became about, chieftainship over obviously lands, villages and treasures. What's the digital equivalent to that? So that you start to really think about personal community ownership over data, over rules, over tā Māori protocols, and how you could actually test things against Māori frameworks and Te Whare Tapawhā, which I know Kevin will be going into in a bit. And it raises the question, why can't an iwi be an identity provider within a national identity framework? Why wouldn't you have systemic and technical interactions between self-sovereign systems and Crown systems, and how should that work? Article 3, of course, when you get into equal rights and duties of citizenship in a digital sense, well, equal and dignified access to services, to infrastructure, to protections of privacy, security, data, right of appeal, equal rule of law, all of these kinds of things. Being able to ensure that the land is maintained domestically to ensure jurisdiction and sovereignty of digital whenua, and making sure that success is not just measured economically and not just according to the wellbeing framework, but also from a Te Whare Tapawhā framework perspective. So, and there's lots to unpack there, which we won't get into today, but you can see that the framework actually provided some real value in starting to think, actually, we could start planning this out. Over the top of all of it, of course, governance must be shared, and how do you actually bring tā Māori protocols and approaches as a bit of a blueprint for high integrity, high veracity, and human community-centric digital infrastructure. We started even thinking about things like, a pepeha effectively is a means of identity proofing and establishing a trusted relationship. You start thinking about all those different protocols that actually translate into a digital world in a very high integrity way. So just briefly, the other steps we went through, which I won't go into detail, but we then said, well, maybe these could translate to layers of infrastructure. Each layer is going to have its own purpose, principles, examples, and frankly, implications for governance and management and measurement. And then each of those could, we just took a whole bunch of different types of pieces of digital infrastructure, and it actually lined up very neatly to the 3 layers plus the governance layer over the top. And then we even started looking at which one of those would be digital government provisioned or government managed, and which ones wouldn't. And that then led to, well, if we were to map each of those pieces against a more traditional, architecture, then even then it aligns actually quite neatly. So that was what we achieved. And there's many years of discussion and unpacking that, but within a couple of weeks, it first of all gave this team a real framework to then build on and collaborate on, but also it demonstrated also the value of Te Tiriti as a starting point for these things, not as a thing to apply after the fact. I'll stop there and I'll hand over to Kevin. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Just before I go into this last, I've only got about 4 or 5 slides, but I guess one of the key things that I wanted to do was show how we could most probably, how such a project could put something into action that we could look as part of the life cycle development of a thing, where we could actually toss it against the wall, throw it around, evaluate it, test it, and see what comes out of that, I guess. And I just want to pick up on that in regards to if I can, gotcha. I just want to pick up on, from where Pia and Maui have left off, carried on from. Within this digital document, and if you don't have a copy of that digital document, I'm sure we can get a copy to you somewhere. There was some recommended pathways forward, but I really wanted to pick up on how we could actually model this and work with it. How can we enact this? How can we put this into action? How can we prototype it? And so just by using Te Whare Tapawhā as a method, it clearly says to me that to some extent it's a social method. The method means that there's people involved in that method. And as part of the processing, as part of this development of hardware, or the purchasing of hardware, as part of the software development. So it's involved right across the life cycle of the artifact itself or the technology itself. But I just want to hone down and just dig down a little bit deeper on what the whare tapa whā could actually look like as a model. And I only used this model because to some extent it's well known in the health circles. And so it resonates with a lot of whānau in the communities. But it's also a model that can traverse over into the technical scene as well. And there could be iwi and whānau out there and hapu out there that have their own models. The question is, can we use this to actually create some type of enactment or delivery of a framework? And so the whare tapa whā has their 4 cornerstones, but I just want to move on with those and say how they could actually be looked in regards to an intelligent system of some type. And I'm talking about a technical intelligence system where we could actually contain information inside this thing called a whare. And inside this whare, there could be actually many methods, many knowledge concepts, many models, but they're well known, they're contained within the whare as a knowledge system. And thinking about that, how to actually now use such models in a technical scenario, I guess, or create some type of relationship or create some type of intelligent enactment of that relationship, to the point where we're using strong mātauranga, so we're using ancient mātauranga as a way to actually frame what knowledge looks like within technology, to use these things called relationships as trusted relationships that are accountable. So in some way there's some countback or some callback within the systems. And I'm starting to refer to things like algorithms now. How do we use these algorithms as accountable transactions inside the actual artifact itself or technology itself. And also this process of engagement, looking at what priorities exist for hapu and tribal communities out there as part of the process of developing any type of technology. And in that way there it becomes an agreement, a reciprocal agreement, where technology is based on an understanding of knowing the purpose and the motivations and the intentions of part of the framing of any new technology. There is a set of relationships and trusted accountabilities within that. And the process of engagement is a kaupapa Māori process of engagement. And if I was to kind of like just dig a little bit deeper again, it's trying to find the central source. And I'm thinking about here, or we've been thinking about, we've got these technical concepts, we've got Western concepts, and we've got indigenous concepts to actually work with. How do we find the actual central point? And if mana is that central point, then how do we go on to use what I think is called strong mātauranga? How do we use the way that I frame technology, the way I think and the way I enact with technology, those relationships to those technologies, and how do we engage? How do we things like porphyry, how do we use ancient knowledge as opposed to trying to create new knowledge systems? And this puppy here starts to come out of it, where the layers start to come get a little bit wider. So as part of that, part of the design of any technology then starts to make sense in some way, where the artifact itself, the purpose and the reasoning behind the technology is known. There is a sense of rapport and trust that has been built up over time as part of the agreement process, or the mutuality process, or the reciprocal processing. And access is a kaupapa Māori way of access. And to some extent, things like, again, porphyry use those protocols quite nicely, where they become processes of access of can I. This is who I am. Am I able to use this? So there's these traditional or mātauranga processes already intrinsically built into Māori communities and hapu systems that we can actually apply to technology in some way. Now, this is not new knowledge. This knowledge has been around a long, long time. In our ancient world, it exists in our rāranga, our tuhituri, it exists in our tāmoko, in our whakairo, and in our new world, our kapahaka teams are using it. But kurato, or a process where mana is central at the middle of it all the time. And in this way, when we're talking about framing technology, then mana, we're talking also about putting the mana or framing at the central point of that or what framing looks like as well. So in this way, mana becomes dynamic, it becomes transient, it can move between these particular triangles at the same time. So just a couple of summary points, I guess. And they're broad at the moment, but I mean, it's early days. These are some of the things that we're working on at the moment. Well, the project is looking to work on, I guess. Digital investment and culture is the emerging how, what, and where domain, where mana is both dynamic and transient. It moves across all that occurs within the modelling of the artifact or of technology. A good understanding of the problem that exists at design time, which means these things all happen at, ex ante, happen at the early stages when building technology. That indicates being part of the identification of the problem, being part of the development of the scoping of any technology, being part of the defining of any problem. So it exists right at the beginning, not halfway through and then inheriting a problem. So part of the problem solution and identification process. Obviously, the notion of a trusted relationship as it progresses from mātauranga into the science domain. And so there's all of that discussion that's required within that too. And the notion that strong mātauranga is a central requirement in reaching consent. And I use this concept, strong mātauranga, because at the moment, AI is considered to be weak. But it isn't going to be long before it actually, over the time, it's going to start to strengthen and strengthen. It's about putting mātauranga at the front, at the forefront there, and using that during the development of as AI starts to build. So I'm open to all sorts of questions. Preferably Maui will answer them. If not Maui, then Pia will answer them. But mihi atu kia koutou. Back to you, Maui.
Kia koutou. Any pārtai, any thoughts about either the Te Tiriti ideas or the ones that Kevin is starting to work through as well? Go on. No one even wrote any things in the chat.
Probably just a comment that, from what I'm understanding, the treaty gives us the why we can do it. The work that Kevin is doing is the how we can do it. So I'm quite liking the things that are happening. Still a lot of questions, but too many to write too quickly. But tēnā koutou.
There was, yeah, look, I remember we were sort of working through this with Pia, and then she made a comment, which I hope she can kind of recall, which was something along the lines of all the components in the stack were still all there. It's just it gave you a different way of thinking about them and the why they were there and its purpose rather than function.
Yeah, I think most architecture in government is done completely in the abstract, like completely distant from purpose and from why or or any sort of reasoning. It's just, well, let's arrange our technologies according to their functions. Okay, anything that's sort of communications, let's put it in this layer, and let's make sure that all of our communication bits talks to the next layer up in a consistent way. By using Te Tiriti as a basis for how we arrange all the bits, it actually gives us a means of not just governing the layers in an appropriate way according to purpose. It gives us a way of making sure that each part of the stack, as it were, actually contributes to that purpose and is aligned to value. So if we think about that Article 1 and that digital whenua concept, anything that is the land we all need to stand on, in a digital sense, needs to be managed in a way which is accessible to all, needs to be measured in a way that is supportive of and ensuring equity of access, needs to be co-governed. It creates certain conditions for the technical, for the technology, for how you govern it, how you run it, and how do you measure success. Unfortunately, a lot of technology today is measured in a pure business sense, a pure economic sense. How efficient is it? How many users does it have, etc. And it actually sometimes creates some perverse incentives in the stack, in the infrastructure, that does not meet any purpose. It just runs, but it's perfectly measured as successful because it's all internally self-reinforcing measures of success, as it were. So yeah, it was a bit of a bet. It was a bit of a, we were trying something new using the treaty as the starting point, but it was actually quite profound because it showed, I think, that you don't have to use a construct and then apply Mataronga Māori. You can actually start from Mataronga Māori and then bring the other things in, and actually get some new value and new benefits and end up with a values-based approach to your work, to your mahi. So that was quite exciting. Frankly, I mean, I will eventually go back into working in government, and while ever it's in this country, it'll probably be leveraging that framework moving forward because it's so much more aligned to the national interest than just starting from a technical framework. I hope that makes sense, Peter.
Sarah, do you want to expand on your question?
So I've just written, what are you finding are your barriers? So in your research preparing this and the paper, and obviously you must have gone out there sort of touting some of that and testing that on all sorts of different people, especially like the government or tech, the tech industry. So just wondering, what have you found? Have you found barriers, I should have asked, and if so, what have they been so far?
So I'll answer this a bit because we're kind of going a bit back to front with this. We haven't done all the work and then we're coming to present it. We're saying, look, here's the idea at the beginning, and what does this sound like to you, and then sort of evolve it. And so I think we're likely to find we're likely to find out with some of those barriers as we continue the conversation. So I think there was certainly, I think, a couple of comments I want to make. As soon as you put the treaty into things, it makes it political. And so I think in that space, there was some nervousness around whether it was something that we should put out and put our name to and that sort of thing. So there was that bit. The other bit is, if you think about like Te Pairangi, which has just come out, the sort of MDs just put out saying, they're wanting to see what a treaty-inspired research and science innovation system looks like. If we want to do those sorts of things or think about, treaty-inspired digital infrastructure, you have to start with something, and you have to get an idea out there so people can imagine what it's like and look beyond the principle part, because we're really good at talking about this is what we think it should be and these are the principles that involve. but kind of pushing down into the sort of the nuts and bolts, we often can't see that part. So this is trying to give a little bit of an example of what that might look like.
I can most probably
Kia ora, and I
just
see
add to
that Pia has written also a good reply. So kia ora. Sorry, Kevin.
Kapa. I can most probably add to that too. I've kind of like been thinking about the layers, and Pierre puts it as, I think we all put it as the stack. And so how does this apply to whānau out in the community? So the model that I spoke about is in that sense here, it's dynamic. So every hapu, every iwi, every whānau will have their own model. So it's having some type of dynamic model. It's localized, it's unique, but it can be communicated in regards to the technology. I think that the other key point that comes into that particular type of modeling is that it involves people early, at the design time anyway. But the model itself, I'm sure Mason will be fine with this, is Te Whare provides a platform of an idea of how to model something. However, we've all got our own tupuna, we've all got our own ways of thinking of how this could be applied to us. It's just being able to communicate that at the application level. That's the interesting part, how to deliver upon it. And that's why I'm quite keen to work with whānau, which I have been doing anyway. Nice question.
Sure. I ask it because of the mihi I do, which is not, I've launched myself out there to test, foolishly, some people might say, but because I totally tautoko that Te Tiriti o Waitangi can be the template, and I've just thrown myself out there and just seen, but to business, because I know that always the bottom line is money. So I like to show that we Māori and Te Tiriti o Waitangi has a very, and he whakaputanga was a complete understanding of economy, power, and so it's not, they're not exclusive, and it's just that it's changing. So I just wondered what you had found. I find that the climate is much better than it's ever been from when I studied law about 100,000 years ago. But yeah, it's just, yeah, so cool, and no, good one.
Just on that point, just real quick, trying to change everything is obviously quite daunting and quite hard, but there is one lever, and that is government. When government adopts a standard, then the money, like lots of money, flows in that direction. If we don't change the measurements for good, away from purely economic, and of course the wellbeing framework's been around for a few years, but I've not seen it really adopted across the board. Like when you put in a business case, you sort of, where are the measures? Where's the public measurement of impact? Where's, it's not quite, integrated into that system, even into the government system yet. But when you change your measures of success, then the money associated with that flows accordingly. If you don't get funding unless you can demonstrate value, if you actually have to measure your benefits in multiple ways, not just economically, then that can have a direct impact on prioritization, on how and where money flows, and on creating a systemic incentive to build systems that actually value are of human value to people outside of just but I've seen too many departments who are like, and I see this all around the world, but I definitely see it here, who are like, we'd like to do blah because it's going to save us a couple of bob. And it's like, but what's the impact on society? What's the impact on the people? What's the impact on, and too many departments unfortunately consider individuals as customers, and of course we're not customers, we're citizens and residents and refugees, and quite often we don't have another option. So the point is, if getting those measures adopted in a practical and pragmatic sense by government, and then having access to that data to monitor and measure, can dramatically change the landscape for how money flows, and therefore shift incentives for the whole system. Just a thought.
Kia ora. Well, kia ora koutou. We're just coming to the top of the hour. Does anyone want one final question? No? Ka pai. Well, Kevin, any kind of final comments from you?
Not really. I'll catch you tomorrow, Avo, Sarah, for a cup of coffee somewhere. Hi, Marion. Yes, I'm in the north, everybody. Trying to do as much mihi as I can before we go into red zone, I think. That's about the only comment to say. It's good to see everybody. And thanks for the support, actually. That's about me.